So welcome. And just while we're letting everybody come in, because everybody tries to come in the door at once, please just go to slido.com and there's a little question there. And we're really asking, what do you think the biggest challenge is, either from your own experience or your observation for academic managers and leaders? Is it setting the scientific direction? Is it dealing with people issues? Or is it reporting findings to external audiences? So that's the Slido question that we are asking. So, and just to let everybody know, yes, we are now starting to record the session. So, fantastic to have you all along for this, our 20th session. We're going to talk today about leading research teams for success. So, in a minute, well, in fact, right now, I'm going to tell you the plan for the session. So I do just ask you to mute your microphones, but we do love to see your face. Remind you, if you're stuck, to reach out to our support team in the chat function. And as ever, just invite you to treat yourself and not try to multitask while you do the talk. Maybe you're ironing or something like that is okay, because that's a different part of your brain, but perhaps not checking your emails. I'd like to acknowledge that we today are on the land of the Whadjuk people, the Noongar Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And do feel free to pop where you are and whose country you acknowledge today. So what we'll do is, as usual, I will kick off with a little bit of framing around this topic and some of the research. And then we have got two wonderful ARC Laureate Fellows here today, Professor Anne Castles and Professor Karen Anstey. And sorry, that's the incorrect surname there, Karen. Sorry about that. I forgot to pick that one up. And just remind you, you're welcome to submit questions via Slido or via the chat, because later somebody is feeding their tiny human. I love that. There's a beautiful from Emily. Thank you for sharing that, your tiny human. Feeding your tiny human on, I can't pronounce that country. So off we go. So I just want to remind everyone that this series is about small wins, and that picture up in the corner depicts what we mean by a small win. So you're a person and you want to get to some big important goal. What's really important is to think of the small steps that you can take along that path. And what we hope is that you come out today with some small steps to helping improve your leadership of teams. So just as an example, we have a question from an ECR that came up from our Women in Research participants. And this person asked, how can I begin to form teams that I lead? So I'd like to invite you to just pop into chat a small step that this person could take. What's a small step that an ECR researcher could take to get onto this journey of forming and leading teams? So my small tip would be, maybe if you're not doing it already, create a little team with a couple of honours students or a couple of master's students, depending on your discipline, and use that as a starting point to learn how to work in teams. So that's my small tip. Oh, I've got another one has said supervise an honours student. Networking, of course, is a great start, because that's where you get invited into other teams as well. We got another suggestion, invite a colleague to be part of a grant application together. That's a great idea. So it's not just you trying, and I can see, Caroline, thank you, work in other teams and build those relationships and bring people onto your team. So lots of nice small tips there emerging. So let's move on now. And I want to start by talking about what is a team, okay? Because sometimes I think we confuse groups with teams, and actually we need to manage groups and teams differently. So first of all, a team has two or more people. But one of the most important things about a team is that there are interdependent tasks. In other words, what that means is that the people in the team, what one of them does affects what another person does. And this interdependence is what enables them to achieve a shared goal. So if you're a supervisor of 2 honours PhD students and they don't work together at all, really you're managing a group. You're not managing a team. But if those PhD students work together on some particular things, some goals, even if it's not all of their goals, then that is a team. And that's significant because, as we'll see later, a lot of the challenges around managing teams are because of this interdependence and this need to coordinate across these tasks to meet the shared goal. So that's what a team is. But what's a successful team? So here I turn to the literature on team effectiveness, and there's sort of 2 basic criteria. The first is team performance. So if you have a successful research team, you would be delivering the goals of that project, whether that's publishing, whether that's impact, whether it's a bit of both. So that's important. But that's not the only thing that defines a successful team, because if you've got this fantastic team, well, if you've got a team that's delivering those goals, but they're fighting and there's stress and it's all about to fall apart, so there's no viability there, then that's not really a successful team. Equally, if you've got a team where everyone loves each other and they have a great old time, but they're not performing, they're not delivering their goals, that's not a successful team either. So really a successful team is about both of those elements together. And that's tricky, right? Sometimes that's tricky, managing both of those components. So with teams, the theory, of course, is that, the sum is more than the parts, or the whole is more than the parts. So you should get more value from a team than you do with a whole bunch of individuals. That's the theory. But this thing called process losses occurs with teams. And what that means is that when we have teams, we've got to do all that coordination that I mentioned before. And sometimes that can actually take more time or cause more problems than the benefit of the team. And that's what we mean by process loss. So a couple of examples here. If honestly you feel like it's just easier to do things yourself, because when you devolve them to the team, it just, creates chaos or arguments or whatever. Or if every decision that you need to make has to be made by consensus in your team and you just spend all your time discussing decisions, that's a process loss. If you've got a team full of people who are just looking for a free ride, they want to get a free paper and no one's actually pulling their weight, that's a process loss. So what you see here is this, and I just grabbed this off the internet here, but this shows this sort of phenomenon called social loafing, which is what that blue line shows. And I think this is some study where men are pulling heavy weights. This is an very old classic study. And in theory, the more men you add, the bigger the weight you should be able to pull. That's the blue line. But the red line is what actually happens, which is that because there's lots of people in the team, as it gets bigger, you feel, oh, well, I don't really need to put in my full effort because other people are going to pick it up. And that's the phenomenon of social loafing. And that's an example of what we mean by process loss. So teams deliver fantastic value, more than the sum of the parts. You bring together unique knowledge, you get all of those wonderful benefits, but you can also have teams that get bogged down in debating or conflict or discussion or lack of action, and these process losses need to be managed. So what we need to do as we are trying to get from over on the left-hand side of this figure here, the inputs, the team, the group of people that you've got within your organisation, to the outcomes, that success that I said before, is we've got to facilitate some processes in the middle to enable that effective coordination within the team. And I'm just going to share with you a model by Michelle Marks and colleagues. It's a quite old model now, but it has recently, or not recently, actually, a meta-analysis has supported this model. And then I'm going to unpack this model using questions from the women in research participants. So what this model says is if you want to avoid these process losses, you need these 3 groups of other processes. And the first is setup. They call them transition processes, but I'm really calling them setup processes. So when you've got a team, you've actually got to think about, well, what are you trying to do? Who's doing what? What are the goals here? How are we going to achieve these goals? What are the strategies? So you've got to set yourself up for success by actually thinking and talking about these things. Then there's a set of action processes which you actually have to just do the work. But of course, in doing the work, you need to monitor how are you going, what's your progress. You need to coordinate, make sure that you are coordinating across the different people because of this interdependence that I already mentioned. And then third, and this is important throughout the whole life of the team, is interpersonal processes. So, you know, I like this quote, the soft, oh, that should say the soft stuff. It says the sort stuff, but it should say the soft stuff is the hard stuff, by which I mean sometimes those problems around managing people and their challenges and their conflicts and the lack of trust. These are the challenging things in teams, but they are so, so important for success of the team. So let me just now go through each of these processes in a little bit more detail. So the first one is these transition processes, which is really, I'm calling it set up for success. And of course, sometimes you have to do this repeatedly because you finish one project and then you have to set up for success for some second project. But really what you're doing here is you want to make sure that your team has an accurate and shared understanding about what it is you're trying to do together. What are you aiming for? Who's doing what? What resources have you got? What constraints have you got? So here's a question from one of the women in research participants who sent this before this session. How do I lead a team whilst doing all the admin? My organisation no longer provides admin support, which makes me a manager, leader, and admin support person all at the same time. And I'm sure Karen and Anne know what I'm talking about here. Admin is a nightmare in universities for everybody. But to me, this question is really, to me, probably one about setting up your team to share those tasks. Now, look, that might not be your strategy, but it's personally the way I would do it. Because if, honestly, as a leader, you're trying to do all that, it's too much. I just think it will be too much. I also believe that if everybody in the team does a little bit of admin, then you share the load. Because let's face it, nobody loves it. Well, some people do, but most of the time, you know, it's something that it's best to share. So I would say, you know, ask yourself, can the admin be shared? You know, and maybe there's some bits that can't, you know, maybe the budget, for example, although I would even share the budget, to be honest, but maybe there's some things you can't. But what can be shared? And can you have it so that each person does one thing? Or is it that there's one big role, but you might rotate it and have your teams do it for 3 months each? So just as an example here, we rotate, and many departments rotate that seminar organisation. Can this actually be part of the development of teams? Because remember, your team members are going to want to put on their CVs later that they've done certain things to try and get promoted. Could some of this administration, you know, be part of their management and leadership journey? So that's a suggestion there, is if you set this up at the beginning and be clear about it, I think that, you know, it's not a big surprise and people don't feel like it's dumped on them. To be honest, I even will tell people in recruitment, you know, if I'm recruiting postdocs, I will say, I will expect you to do some of the administration, not all of it. It will be shared, but I expect it, so they know. So it's not a surprise when they come. So that's the first thing. Set yourself up for success by being clear about what your goals are and who's doing them and how you can share those sorts of tasks. Okay, then we move on to the second processes, which is just all about action. So as your team is going, you know, you need to be fostering this effective coordination and communication within your teams. And we had a session a couple of months ago on meetings. And of course, meetings are a critical way of fostering communication. But it's also about cultivating those appropriate norms of behaviour so that even if you're not there, the group knows how to behave appropriately. So let's again go to a women in research participant question. And this woman asked, how hands-on should the team leader be in the process? Should I outsource all aspects of the project except the project leadership, or should I get involved, for example, in data entry or analysis? This is a great question, and I had to think about this a little bit. And this is my answer to the question. And again, Anne and Karen might have different answers. But to me, the answer to the question would be, what are you trying to achieve with your hands-on behaviour? What function are you trying to establish? So, for example, are you trying to, that was going to be role model, but are you trying to demonstrate a particular approach? For example, you might have a view that the data analysis could be done in a more efficient way than currently your team is doing. So you might get involved so that you can demonstrate that more efficient way. Or you might want to be advancing the analysis, doing something quite advanced that your team hasn't got the skills to do. Or you might want to be role modeling that, you know, some of these tasks are a bit tedious, and to go back to the first point, and let's share them around, and you as a leader are willing to jump in, you know, when the team's under pressure, and you're happy and you're role modeling that that's what you think leaders should do, or something else. So I don't think that you should just automatically be doing these more lower level tasks. I think that sometimes it will serve an important purpose to do those. And that's what I would encourage you to think about. What is the purpose that's being served? And then to tailor that appropriately, accordingly. So I hope that's helpful. Think about why you would do that and what is the message or why you might not. I think it's also okay not to do those things if there's no purpose behind it. Okay, number 3, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. So the interpersonal aspects of running a team. And here we're talking about building your team's motivation and confidence. And of course, a big component here is preventing and managing conflict. And I do think leadership development can help. So I do think if you have the opportunity to go on leadership programs or management courses, it can help. As much as anything, it can be an opportunity to just pause and reflect on how you are doing things. But also it's usually an opportunity to build your skills. So one of the women participants did in fact ask this very question, how can I handle conflict amongst the team? Well, the first thing I'd say is there's different sorts of conflict in teams. The most damaging, and this is supported by research, is when that conflict becomes personal. If it's conflict about the task, like, well, I disagree with how we should do things, you know, that can actually be healthy, right? Because people have different views. And if that can be part of knowledge exchange and sharing information on how you can all do things differently and learn from each other, that's great. But when it becomes personal, about what I don't like about you as a person, or what I perceive as your personality problems or your ability problems, that is when it becomes the most damaging. So the first thing I'd say is try to prevent that sort of conflict, and you can prevent it by having that set up for success, you know, earlier. The more that you can be clear about roles, and of course you have to adapt if things change, but the more you can be clear about roles, the more that you can foster psychological safety, you know, big buzzword at the moment, but basically just means a sense of safety where people feel able to speak out and put forward their opinion and have different views. The more you can do that, the more that you prevent this unhealthy, toxic conflict from emerging. Of course, if it does, then you should address it early and skillfully. Now, we don't have time for me to say what does it mean to do it skillfully, but I've included there an article. This is from the Centre for Creative Leadership. It's a very reputable, evidence-based leadership development group, and they give a nice sort of series of steps, you know, of what you can do about that. And we can talk about that more in question time if you want to. But just to say that it takes skill to manage some of these things, and never be afraid to, find these sorts of articles and get some tips about how you can address conflict. So just end with a quote from Helen Keller, who I love, and she always says such inspirational things. But alone we can do so little, together we can do so much, if we don't have those process losses that I talked about before. So that's it from me. I hope that just gives you some frame for thinking about successful teams and how you as a leader can help to cultivate those successful teams. And I'm now absolutely delighted to introduce our two ARC Laureate Fellows. So first up, we'll have ARC Laureate Fellow Karen Anstey, who is an ARC Fellow, but also a Scientia Professor at University of New South Wales. And she does many wonderful things, and you can see her bio there. But as an example, she leads an NHMRC Centre of Excellence in Cognitive Health, and she also directs the UNSW Aging Futures Institute. So, and in her role, I know this because I see Karen and we work together on some projects. She manages very successfully large numbers of teams. So, and then after Karen, we will go straight across to ARC Laureate Fellow Anne Castles, who I'm delighted to welcome for the first time to the Women in Research series. And she is a distinguished professor of cognitive science and the scientific director of the Macquarie University Centre for Reading. And we were just chatting before everyone started about some of the debates that are occurring in that literature. So she has a special interest and expertise in reading development, dyslexia, and other sorts of topics. So without further ado, I am going to stop sharing my screen and we will go over to Karen, first of all.
Thanks, Sharon, and hello everyone. So I've just been asked to give some sort of personal anecdotes. This is not based on research, it's my own experience. So I have had a lot of leadership experience, first with my own research group, then a unit, then a centre, and now an institute. And I must say, when I started leading a team, I was looking for that dummies guide. Like, there was dummies guide to everything else, but there was nothing. There was no handbook on how to be a leader in academia or how to manage all the research administration that suddenly you're encountering in academia. And so I think there is a very steep learning curve. A lot of the tasks and things that I had to learn, you will have to learn. And I don't think there is an easy answer to some of it. So things like the managing of the budgets, the contracts between institutions, getting across the HR issues, there is a learning curve. So you have to accept that. It's not because we're not taught how to do that. You're taught how to do research. So having said that, I totally agree with Sharon that then if you can go on some training, some leadership training, so a lot of universities in the Group of 8 and other organisations offer training, I would highly recommend that. It won't prepare you for your specific issues. So you're always going to have some management leadership issues that are unique to you, that you'll have to sort of learn to deal with. And that's where some of those more generic skills are important. And I'll just give you an example of something that I encountered fairly early. I was about 10 years postdoc. I got a big grant at ANU, and we were trying to develop a pooled data set across nine institutions, and we had to develop the IP agreement around the data. I didn't even know what IP was, to be honest, before we got this. I'd never read a contract, never realised that universities even had a legal office. And I spent 12 months negotiating with the legal officers and the contracts across all of these different institutions. There was no one who could tell me what to do. It was a complete nightmare. And yeah, that was probably the hardest sort of experience I've had of being thrown in the deep end with research, leadership and management, and just really having nowhere to turn. So I think everyone's probably got their thing that they've had to deal with. So that's just an example there. Now, I think with the training courses, I've done two. I did one fairly early when I was a postdoc, and then I did another leadership course in 2008 when I just became a professor. And What I learned, I mean, there's all the content in the course is fantastic, but I think what a leadership training course helped me do was actually step out and reflect on what leadership is, and made me realize that it is something. It's not something that you squeeze in around your research. It's not something that you do at night after you've done your work. Leadership is something, and it requires an investment of your time and thought. You need to think about your leadership. You need to put time into it. You have to think about the culture of your team, what you want that to be like, the values that you want to reflect, the sorts of relationships. It's going to take time out of your schedule. And then in terms of your overall career, it depends what sort of leadership roles, whether you like leadership or you'd much prefer to be more focused on your research and keep leadership to a small part of your job. But regardless, it is something, and it requires investment and reflection on your sort of personal style and what you're doing and what's working and what isn't. So I think that in itself is really important. And even doing this webinar today is giving you a chance to reflect. I'm just going to find some other points. Some of them Sharon has made. I think just a few sort of tips from me. I think time management is really important, and you hear about it. I remember when I started my PhD at UQ, we had this sort of orientation, and I think it was Cindy Galwa who was there then. I don't know if there's anyone online from UQ. She gave a talk on time management, and that I'd never heard of time management back then. I mean, everyone hears about it now, but I was like, wow, that's, and at the time, and she said to us, you don't realize how important this is going to become. And I thought, and she was 100% right. Time management is absolutely critical, and it becomes more important as you progress in your career. You need to have a diary. You need to diarise the time to spend with your team. You need to have regular meetings with your team. And you need to have time. I even put in phone calls and things now to make sure I have time to do things. If I have to give a talk, I'll put time in my diary to prepare it. So it's learning to allocate your time and think carefully about your time that will help you manage this. I noticed in a lot of the questions, I could sense that people are feeling very stretched between their research and leading the team and management. And I think so time management is really critical there. I totally agree with Sharon about delegating. With the admin and lack of admin support, we all suffer from that, and we'll have to allocate admin to your team, and that I think we all have to accept that is part of our jobs, and you can build that into a PD for a research assistant or postdoc that they take on a particular admin task, and it can be part of career development and training. The other thing that I've learned in my sort of leadership experience is how valuable the institutional training and policy can be. So again, when I started, I always thought it was really boring. There were these mandatory training courses we all had to do. Even now when I get the emails saying that I have to update my skills, I'm like, oh, when am I going to fit that in? But when you have a problem, the university has a lot of really, really helpful policies, and this is particularly with HR issues. So, and our university and many universities will have a set of values. So if your team has done their mandatory training, you can sometimes use these as a talking point to address an issue. The policies are there to help you manage some of the HR issues that you will encounter during your career. There's often a lot of resources there, and when I look back, I don't think I use them. I don't think I realised the value that was actually there in trying to manage. I tried to manage too much myself. Whereas now, anything that comes up, I immediately look to see if there's an institutional response or a guideline or something, and then it's not a personal thing. I can just refer to a policy. So that's something I've learned. So I'd say being up on your training. You also do need to know, particularly all the HR issues around work. I mean, the universities have been in trouble for all of the, breaching of payment of employees and that. So as you go up and you have more responsibility for employing staff, you really need to be across all of that. I've just got some other sort of fairly practical things, but having the roles outlined. So I don't know if anyone online conducts clinical trials, but if you run a clinical trial, you actually have a document that outlines the role that each person has on that trial. And it's actually a good practice across all of your research. So you know everybody who is responsible for what, because if you're running a project that's got complex data collection, you may lose track of who's done what or who's responsible for what or who was to hand over, etc. And that can cause conflict or lack of productivity. Having good processes in place and having a clear of, being clear about who's responsible for what is really important. And the other thing is establishing processes and expectations around transparency. So you should be able to see what work your staff have done, should be stored for privacy and according to all of our regulations, our data has to be stored on our university systems. You should be able to access to see what work has been done. So it just has to be a standard. So once you've got transparency, you can track errors and you can also hand over between staff if something goes wrong. So that's something I think in the past we weren't so careful about, but now I think it's absolutely essential. So yeah, I think I'll stop there and hand over to Anne, and then we've got a question time and we can answer more questions. So.
Anne, you're on mute.
There we go. I was just saying I wish I didn't come after Karen because she covered so many of the points that I was also going to cover. But I suppose I wanted to start with a sort of broad conception of the way I think about teams and research teams, and that is that, yes, there is someone who is managing the enterprise, but ultimately I like to see everybody else involved as my junior colleagues and not as, lowly postdocs or PhD students who need to be told what to do and who are, need guidance. Of course, they do need guidance, but I think it's great if you can create a scenario where every member of your group is both led and also does leadership activities. So it's not that sense of sort of there's the big fancy super researcher at the top and everybody else is just acting in their service, but rather what you have is a team where everybody feels that they have a certain role and everybody participates and does leadership roles at the level that's appropriate for them. And I think that's come up in terms of sharing administrative roles. I think it's fantastic if everybody in the team, appropriately to their level, takes responsibility for certain administrative roles. And I know in my current team, for example, we have 3 postdocs who across them manage the sort of social media side of things. So they have set up the Twitter page and the Facebook page and constantly update that with recent, events and things. And I think not only does that mean that it saves time for us as leaders, but it also, my experience is that junior researchers really appreciate being given that kind of responsibility. And when they're given that kind of responsibility, they feel committed to the team. And so you get that, not the sense that people are being told what to do, but rather that people are coming in and wanting to contribute in particular ways that are most appropriate to their expertise and seniority. It's a very intangible thing, and it has in the things that Karen and you have said, but I think it's really important to create a sense of group. And it's not necessarily easy to figure out exactly how you do that. But in my experience, it's it's the simple things that make a difference. You know, social events where all of the team are invited along, away days where everybody reports on where they're at in a particular aspect of their research, and others get the opportunity to find out about that and also potentially come in and collaborate on that if it's appropriate. You know, celebrating successes, I think, is something that really helps to cement a group culture. So we, in a previous group that I led, we had they were called cognitive science selfies. And so anytime anybody had got a paper in a prestigious journal or been invited to an important conference, they could either report that themselves to the group email, or someone would do that on their behalf. They were a bit shy. So, you know, always making sure that people feel part of the group and that their successes are celebrated, whether it be by themselves or by others in the team, so that there's that sense of group. I think it's really key to make sure, and this comes into the sort of junior colleagues idea, that those who are more junior feel completely comfortable with talking or raising issues with those who are more senior. And they can do that at any point and feel comfortable to do that at any point. And I think, well, my experience has been, if you can create that culture where the leader is not, you know, some sort of authoritarian figure, but is part of the team, that then you're less likely to get those difficult issues in terms of conflict amongst the team or lack of understanding of what a role is, because you're always hearing from and contributing to the team, just as yourself as a researcher and not necessarily as a leader. Now, as people have said, of course, ultimately as a leader, you do have to come in at certain points and direct people in a certain direction, or put things in place, and this is where university guidelines come in place to deal with a particular issue. But generally, my experience is that those issues are greatly minimised when you've got a team that feels where everybody feels respected and everybody understands their role, and nobody feels like anybody is better than anybody else. The leaders are, you know, I always say we're only leaders because we're old and crusty, not necessarily because we've had training in leadership. As Karen said, we didn't get any training in this. We just ended up here. And yeah, we're older than all of you, but we don't necessarily have all the answers. And we want junior staff to be able to come in many cases, and answer some of these questions or deal with some of these leadership issues. And that creates a sense of group as well. I do think, and this has also come up so far, to really get a great group functioning, you know, so much of that is about recruitment, and being very careful about who you recruit and why. And a lot of that, of course, is the expertise, but I think there's another component, which is selecting a person who is who clearly understands the way the group operates and what their role is in it, and that you know, they don't come in and sort of, you know, bulldoze over everything that's going on and feel like they have some special role, but in the recruitment process to really closely question them about what they want to achieve from the team, what their ultimate, you know, 5-year plan is or beyond that, so that you get a group of people who understand both what they want to achieve, but also what everybody else in the team wants to achieve. And so you create that sense of transparency about the nature of the group. And that comes down, as has already been mentioned, to really small things like, you know, when you start a new project or sub-project, having the group sit together, talk about what their contribution might be, make very clear who's going to be the leader and who's going to, you know, be the one to write the paper. These things can change over time as a project develops and somebody else comes in, but that you're always being really as clear as possible about what people's roles are and what they hope to achieve from it. And if you can do that, then I think you get a lot less problems down the track that have to come to HR. You certainly don't get rid of them altogether, but you create a group of people who all understand what everybody wants to achieve and who are very, very clear about what their role is in that. I always emphasize to my junior colleagues that, you know, I'm on a learning curve in many cases as much as they are. And it came up with, yeah, you know, new stats packages that like that I haven't got a clue about, but my PhD students are brilliant at it. And so making it clear that just because they're the more junior member of the team doesn't mean that they're not the ones with the expertise and the knowledge, and that even their senior, you know, big boss may well have a lot to learn from them, and that they very much feel like they're not intimidated by feeling that they can't share their knowledge with their superior, or that they feel somehow like they shouldn't do that. And so I'll probably just stop there, but you know, I guess this segment is on leadership, and ultimately this is all about leadership. But for me, leadership ultimately involves making sure that everybody on the team is a leader, and understands their role and can advise up as well as advise down. And then you get people feeling really that sense of cementing the group as a positive place to work.
So Anne, I'm not sure if you can anyone hear me? Yes. Yep. Sorry, Anne, I will stop you there because we do want to squeeze in a few questions. But first of all, thank you so much. I love the two stories. I think, Karen, you know, very much the journey of development and learning was a key theme. And Anne, I think a key theme around establishing that sort of culture of the team, going right even back to recruitment, actually, and trying to recruit people who are going to fit into that culture. So thank you so much. I'm going to go to Annika now.
Yes.
Welcome, Annika. Annika is a PhD student of mine, and she is going to, I think, first of all, share the responses to the Slido, and then you're going to fire some questions at us.
Exactly. All right, I quickly share my screen with you guys. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
So,
okay.
Yeah, what we're seeing here is like pretty clear answers. The biggest challenge for most is dealing with people issues. I think we covered it already quite well, but I think it's interesting to see that it's not the professional basis, but more on interpersonal conflicts that are challenging for people.
Thank you, Annika. And I sort of was hoping that would come out, because I do think certainly that's been my experience, and most people I talk to. We always think it's about the scientific direction, and, you know, ironically, that's what ARC focuses on, you know, when they give us grants and things, but often it's actually these other elements. So yeah, so fire some questions at the panel. That would be great.
All right. There was one question regarding That fits quite well with what Anne was talking about earlier about juniors being comfortable of bringing up questions to seniors. And there has been a question from, I think, an early career researcher who wants to know how, as an early career researcher, can you establish credibility when you're for the first time leading a team? Because usually, yeah, the leader is the more senior person or older. But what if you're doing it for the first time and maybe people that you are leading are actually older than you are yourself? Do you have any tips on that?
Do you want to start, Karen?
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question, and it is difficult. But I think the leadership is the role that you're adopting for that. Like it's a bit like sport, where you've got people on a soccer team that one person has to be the captain, and it's the same with leading anything. So the leader has to take the stand, or organise the meeting, set the agenda, and chair it. So I think it's partly just adopting that role for that purpose. It will be uncomfortable when you start. I think it's learning to tolerate some of that sense of, and that's when we get into that imposter syndrome, which we've had a whole session on. I think that was the other one that I spoke on.
Oh, yeah.
But I feel like it's probably something to push through if it's your first time. And yeah, having organising a meeting, having an agenda, having those sort of support structures in place, it would help you. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it's leadership is almost an emergent property in these kinds of situations, and it's obviously very difficult if you're doing it for the first time, or where, as you say, you've got other people in the team who arguably are more senior to you. But I think, again, it's in some ways the simple things that you do that help to establish you as the one who is guiding this project, not necessarily the leader of the world or anything like that, but who's the one who's guiding this project. And that is things like having regular meetings, making clear at all times whose role is what in the group, and ensuring, again, that everybody feels completely comfortable with and indeed encouraged to ask questions of the leader and raise suggestions, talk about problems that they're having, and that's done sort of in a really transparent and ongoing way throughout the project. So you, as the leader, make it clear that ultimately you're the one, yes, who has to sign off on the annual report and has to do all of these things, but what you're doing is a guiding process where, I guess I'm talking about I know there's a whole load of organizational speak on this kind of thing, but, sort of go for a fairly flat structure where, everybody feels like they're a leader of something. And then if you're the leader and you're you yourself feel like you're quite junior, the task doesn't seem so overwhelming, because what you're doing is saying, I'm guiding this project, but I'm not necessarily the one who has all the answers. I'm just the person who's sitting here right now, setting up this set of research and doing it as best as I can with my team.
Thank you, Anne. Annika, continue on, because I think these guys have covered that question really well.
Sure. There was another question regarding interpersonal relationships, as that was the main thing on Slido. I thought it might be interesting to throw that in. So there was one person who asked how to manage dual relationship. Let's say you have a research assistant, but at the same time you're also supervising the student because she's doing a PhD. How to deal with these different relations with the same person. Karen, maybe you have some thoughts on that?
I have several people in my lab who are PhD students and also research assistants. So I guess we have set days, set research assistant days. So on that day, they're a research assistant and they email me in the morning what their tasks will be. And we also have project meetings each week for each project. So they would come to that in their role as the research assistant. So it's sort of a separating it out in terms of time is probably just, and the rest of the time they're students. So it should be, I think having those structures in place helps.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think what can very much happen is you get kind of scope creep or bracket creep or whatever you want to call it, where if someone is a student and also a research assistant and they really want to obviously do the best for whoever's employing them as a research assistant, that there can be a tendency for them to spend too much time on that, and that's has a negative effect on their performance as a student. So I completely agree. I think the way to do this is be really clear and structured with that person as to how much time they're going to spend as a research assistant and what's left for their research, and making sure that, when you're looking at their timesheets or anything else, making sure that that is happening, and making sure that those members of the team feel very comfortable to come forward and say, I'm supposed to be doing my next experiment, but I can't because I'm, running this project as a research assistant. Because that's, in my experience, if a leader finds out that, they will very quickly put something in place to assist that. They will employ another research assistant, or they will, change the hours, or they will do something. So it's about communication, and it's about, making sure the team member knows how much time they should be spending on each role, and that they should raise the issue if they're not doing what they've what everybody has agreed to be their time component.
All right. I think we have time for one more question. There were quite some questions regarding leading groups with different cultural backgrounds, and also on that matter, how to manage global teams. So when you're in a hybrid or remote situation, is there, do you have any tips on how to deal with that if you, under certain circumstances, probably sometimes not even see all of the participants of the team in person?
They're really good questions.
Maybe I can jump in here. I think sometimes that some of the processes that we've talked about become even more important. So having clarity of roles and having an agenda. I think sometimes that challenges around diversity, whether they be diversity in terms of culture, personality, expertise, discipline, and there are many sorts of diversity that we have to work with, they sometimes become bigger when things are very unstructured. So I would just encourage, all of the things that we've been talking about, I think, become even stronger under those scenarios. So clarity of roles and expectations and so on. But Anne, Karen, do you have anything to add?
Well, I totally agree with that. And I mean, I suppose it's something that's come up for me recently, because I do have a project that involves a number of international collaborators. And, during COVID and post-COVID, of course, we've moved to Zoom, and, that was necessary. That's the only way we could get, the team together. But for me, I think it does not, Zoom and everything else cannot replace face-to-face collaboration, and getting your team actually physically together if you possibly can, whether it's for a conference or an annual workshop or whatever it is. And I really hope that post-COVID and with Zoom becoming so prominent, or Teams or whatever else, that we don't lose that, and we don't lose the opportunity to fund that in our teams, because certainly my experience is, yes, you can talk over Zoom till the cows come home, but ultimately you get everybody together in an annual workshop. They're all talking to each other during lunchtime. They're getting to know each other's cultural differences and all those things. That happens when you have a face-to-face engagement.
I think I totally agree with everything that's been said. And I think, we have to absolutely embrace diversity and spend time understanding people's diverse backgrounds and seeing how they really enrich our work. And I think developing, having a culture of respect and interest in people's diversity and what it brings to our team. I think it needs to be an active sort of focus of what we do, and it will benefit everybody. So I think, there are some sort of themes that are coming through, like developing that workplace culture and respect, and being a place where people feel able to discuss, put forth for their views is really important to all of this. The thing about the international collaborators, that we've all got those, and it's really difficult, because I just say I can't do Zooms outside a certain time zone frame, because I'm not going to start getting up in the middle of the night. And I know I've got some colleagues who'll do it, but I can't function the next day. So I don't know. It's really, really difficult for people. I think you do need to plan to take time off during the day and look after your health. You can't work a full day and then just expect to do all these extra Zooms before and after work, and you have the rest of your life, family and that. So that's probably the only thing that I'd say there is, you've got to really, if you're going to be staying up late on Zoom, take the morning off or something.
Yeah, I think that's a great wrap up of what we were saying. So take care of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much for your insights. Sharon had to head off already because she has another talk in 2 minutes. So that's why she left us a little bit earlier today. But I would like to thank you both, Anne and Karen, so much for joining us today, for sharing your insights with us and your expertise on the topic. And also I would like to, of course, thank everyone who joined the session today. This session is recorded, so if anybody wants to come back to it, feel free. And it's a wrap. Thank you for joining, everybody.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And it's Belle. See you, everyone.
See you.
Thank you, everyone.